Hi, my name is Josh, and this video is a recording of a presentation I gave at the Clerkenwell Design Week in London in May of 2015. So if you attended that event and are looking for that presentation, this is the right place. If you've stumbled across this video, it's basically a collection of tips that I'd like to aim towards beginners in SketchUp, especially in the interior design field. So it's really just a collection of tips that I thought I could fit into about an hour. And it's not really a follow-along video, it's more of a sit back with some coffee or tea, and hopefully I can show you a few tips. First thing I want to talk about is groups, components, and layers in SketchUp. It's good to understand how those things work. First I'm going to draw a secondary smaller cube here next to this larger one, and move that so it connects to it, and show you that geometry in SketchUp does stick together. If you don't have a group or component, that's fundamental behavior, and it's actually pretty useful for conceptual design, but a lot of times we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to undo that and show you that if you make a group out of it first, I can right click, say make group, move that over there again, and you can see that it no longer sticks to that geometry because it's in its own wrapper. A group or component is basically a wrapper for geometry, so I have to double click now to get inside the edit mode for this. So you can see that there's kind of a bounding box that's enclosing that geometry now. I'll make a copy of this one off to the side here and show you that you can also explode a group to kind of undo that step. So here's the same object exploded, so it's no longer a group, and that one is still a group over here. If I make a component out of this one, same process, select it all, right click, choose make component, and you can see initially I have the chance to give it a name and fill out a few other areas. In this case I'm not going to do any of that, but it is good practice to name your components. It's good for organization for your model. I'll choose create. So visually there's really no difference here between the component and the group. I'll show you here if I make a quick edit to this component so it looks a little different. The fundamental difference between groups and components I'll show here as I copy both of these. And I'll cover copies a little bit later as well, making arrays in SketchUp. But if I make a change to this group here, you can see that only the group is affected. However, with the component, if I make a change to this component, every instance of that component is updated because they're all linked together. So the basic difference is that components you want to use for repeating elements in your model, and groups are really just basic wrappers for any kind of geometry. Or you can also make, let's say if I select all of these objects, I can make a group out of all of these. So now there's groups nested within a larger group. And you can see here if I open up my entity info panel, window, entity info, when I click on a group, for example, it'll tell me it's a group, and the component, that's a component. So this is a good box to have open. Perhaps when you're modeling all the time, it's good to click on different things and see information about them. So here I can see the area of a surface. Click on a line, I can see the length of that line. And I also want to mention that if you hear me say base geometry, what I mean by base geometry is geometry like this that I can click once and select a surface or a line, or geometry that's inside of a group or component like this. When I get into the edit mode here, I'm selecting now down into the base geometry. So regarding base geometry, a really important thing to know in SketchUp, especially if you're a beginner, is how layers work with what's called layer 0 or the default layer. So if I open up the layers panel here, you can see I've got a couple layers already created there. I'm going to get rid of this stuff for now and show you this in the context of the model over here. So for example, with these seating cubes here, if I click once, you can see that it is a group. It's a group with nested components inside. So if I double click, I can get to these components inside the larger group. You can see it says component, and there's 18 of those in the model. If I double click on one of those, make a change, you can see that they are all linked. Every instance of that component is updated. But the important thing I want to show here is that the base geometry of this component is on layer 0. So if I wanted to make a layer called seating, for example, and put these on the seating layer, I'll show you the best way to do that. So I just made a new layer called seating. When I click on this group now, you can see initially it's on layer 0, but I can click on this drop down and choose that new layer that I just made. Now it's on the seating layer, and I can uncheck that box for visibility. Uncheck that, and it goes away. But the geometry, the base geometry of those elements is actually still on layer 0. So if I go back into these components here and click on this surface, that's on layer 0. So that surface, one of these lines or edges, is on layer 0. But if I jump back out, you can see that the group that contains that information, or that geometry, the group itself, is on the seating layer. And that's really important in SketchUp, is that your base geometry, all your edges and surfaces, should always be on layer 0. And a good way to ensure that happens is to always make sure that this radio button on the left side of these layer names, you always want that to be on the left side there. You don't want to be clicking around like this, because you're changing the active layer if you do that. So keep that next to layer 0, and any geometry that you draw will be automatically placed on that current or active layer. And if you're curious about these colors over here, a lot of people ask about that. All that lets you do is if you click on this little button here and choose color by layer, you can get a quick view of the layers that you have based on the color over here. Not super useful, but if you're wondering what that is, you can toggle that on and off. Okay, let's talk about the 3D warehouse. So as you can see, if I zoom out here, I've got some material swatches over here. I've got stuff on my countertops and lots of things in my model that I didn't actually draw myself, which is pretty great because you can use our 3D warehouse to download items like this for your model that you don't have to actually draw. So like light fixtures, all this entourage, you can get that for free from our 3D warehouse and focus on your design. And if you're new to that, what that is you can access that by going to File, 3D Warehouse, Get Models, or you can use this icon here. And if you're new to this, it's important to note that there's two ways to access the 3D Warehouse and also the Extension Warehouse, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the 3D Warehouse and the Extension Warehouse can be accessed from within SketchUp. So right now I'm accessing this, but I'm still in SketchUp. And if I go to my browser, I'll show you that you can also access both of these things, the 3D Warehouse and the Extension Warehouse, from your browser, and that's the address for the 3D Warehouse there. And you can certainly use this. If you go to the warehouse from your browser, you'll just be downloading an SKP file to your computer, which you'll then need to open separately. So the benefit to using the warehouse inside of SketchUp is that you can download something and put it directly into your model. So the 3D Warehouse is basically a collection of a lot of content. You can upload to the warehouse for free, and we've got a lot of good stuff from manufacturers as well. So you can see here, if I just cruise through some of these logos, you can do a search for these companies here, or click on one of their logos and it'll take you right to their page on the 3D Warehouse. You can scroll down and find curated collections. In this case, I'm going to choose seating here and see what they have for seating. I've got one of these sofas in my model already, so I just want to show you, when you click on an object like this, you can see a little more information about it. So you've got downloads, likes, file size, and polygon count here. If that is a new concept to you, basically that just means it tells you how many polygons that model is made up of. So polygons are basically the building blocks of a 3D model. So you just want to pay attention to that number and just make sure it doesn't get too big. If there's no exact number that you need to pay attention to for certain models, it's just sort of a ballpark estimate. You know, as you download things like maybe trees that maybe have every leaf modeled, you may have a larger polygon count there. So just be aware that that number does matter as things start to get larger. And as you download more items, maybe just look at that number and kind of see the polygon count for the things that you're bringing into your model. And the reason that's important is because sometimes you can put an unnecessarily large model into your model, which might slow down the performance. So just kind of be aware of that number there. And this little icon up here lets you orbit the model before you actually download it into your model. So you can see here I can click and orbit and maybe inspect it a little bit longer. So a chance to check it out before you actually put it into your model. Okay, I want to show you the advanced search now, and if I click on this little arrow here, you can access the advanced search. And this is pretty nice because you can really narrow down the results by filling out some of these fields here. I'm just going to give it a few pieces of information. Drawer, author name, SketchUp. And I want to show you this checkbox here for only show dynamic models, also known as dynamic components. So I'm really just filling out three things here: the text for the title area, and author name, and dynamic models. If I do a search on that, I'm only going to see results that are all dynamic components. If I click on this base cabinet here, you can see that this little icon, if you see that, that's what that means, that it signifies that that model is a dynamic component. And again, because I'm inside the 3D warehouse, inside of SketchUp, I can just click on download and toss this model right into my current model. So I want to show you what's special about a dynamic component. I'll pull up the toolbar for dynamic components. Click on this button here to see the options that I have for this component. So this is currently 48 inches wide. I can change that to 36 and perhaps say yes to finished end and then apply, and you'll see the model update here. So I don't actually have to update that model myself by changing the geometry. If it's a dynamic component and has these options, you can see that this reflects a real world object, so it does have fixed options there you can choose from. Another cool thing is I can use this little magic finger. If you hover over different objects, you'll see that that little icon indicates that something can be animated. So this is nice for space planning. You can click and do a quick animation for certain objects. Of course, not every component is going to have that ability, so you can certainly do the same type of action with perhaps the rotate tool here. So I can rotate this drawer or this door out and see. Maybe it helps me for space planning, understand how that affects the space that it opens up into. So let's get rid of that guy, and I want to zoom out a little more and show you these material swatches over here. You can also get this kind of stuff from the 3D warehouse. I've already got this material applied to a countertop in my model. If I wanted to change that, let's say I wanted to try this one here, I can use the paint bucket tool and I can sample that texture. So I've sampled that, put it in the paint bucket, and I can apply it elsewhere. The important thing here is that I don't actually want to just click before going into the edit mode for the group or component. I certainly can try that, and sometimes it'll work. You can see here it doesn't actually appear to do anything. If I go to Entity Info and select that, you can see that the material was applied, but it doesn't appear to be actually on the surface here. So I'm going to undo that. You'll see the default material go back there. So what I want to do is go double click to get inside the edit mode for this group, and I want to apply this directly to the surface. So that way I'm applying it right to the surface in SketchUp, and that's the best way to apply materials, is to actually go inside all the way to the base geometry here and apply that right to that surface. Now let's say I don't want to keep that one there. I want to actually use the one that I had before, so I can perhaps sample one over here. So I'll do that again. Paint bucket tool, using a modifier key to sample that material. Go back over here, get inside the edit mode, and then reapply that. You'll notice that sometimes you may have a seam. So for example, if I right click, go to texture, position, sometimes you may have a seam like this where you don't want it. So if you take a look, you can see here, I can see that this texture is tiling right there. And in this case, this material swatch is large enough that I don't need to have a seam right there. So I can right click on that surface, go to texture, position to adjust that. Now you won't see this option if you're outside of the group. So if I go out one level there, try to right click here, there's no option for texture. I need to be inside all the way to that base geometry level, and then right click and do texture, position. So now I can adjust it, and here I'm just kind of looking at that blue dotted line there. that shows me the boundary of this material swatch. And I can move that around, and if I want to rescale it, I can use these grips here. The green one's pretty useful. That one is the one you probably use the most. You can click and drag on that one to rotate or scale it up. So in this case, I'm just making sure that the boundaries of this texture swatch do not intersect with this geometry. So now if I right click and choose done, there's no seam where it's tiling on that surface. I also want to mention that as you're downloading things from the 3D warehouse, you need to remember that these items are created by somebody else. So as you download them, you may see new layers appear, and you just want to be careful that you're kind of managing that as you bring these things into your model. So if new layers come in, just kind of clean those up. If you don't want the layers that are part of that component, just clean those up and match them to the layer hierarchy that you have. Regarding these texture swatches over here, I also want to mention if I delete something, let's say I get rid of these materials here, or these objects, they're really just surfaces in SketchUp with a material applied. But if I get rid of something like this, delete it, it appears to be gone, but SketchUp actually retains that information in the model. So what you want to do is occasionally purge your model. And the best way to do that is go to Window, Model Info, and you can purge unused, and this is under the statistics on the left side here. And you can see here I just deleted those materials or textures, and it tells me now it's at 171. If I choose purge unused, you can see that it updates to 161. So even though it was deleted, SketchUp still retains that information until I purge it. And that's important because your file size can be reduced, and especially if you're pulling in lots of 3D warehouse models and deleting them as you're changing your mind, remember that SketchUp is retaining some of that information until you purge it. You can also purge separately from the materials browser here. I can click on this and purge unused there. Same with layers. Any unused layers can be purged as well. But it's a little bit better to do this from the Window Model Info because you can just purge it all at once. Alright, let's talk about the manipulation of textures again on this area here that has tiles. Let's say I wanted to have 3 tiles across this width here. So again, I'm double clicking to get inside the edit mode, and then I'm right clicking right on that surface, choosing texture position. And again, the green grip is the most useful. I can rotate and rescale from there. If I click anywhere, I can just move it around. But if I click on that green grip here, I can resize, and I'm just kind of eyeballing the grout there and making sure the grout lines up. When I have what I like, I can push enter or right click and choose done. And you'll notice that the adjacent texture here on this other side is the same material or texture, but it's not the right scale anymore. So I can again sample this one and apply it to the adjacent surface. I also want to show you how to soften and hide edges if you need to in SketchUp. So let's say that this cushion came in from the 3D warehouse and it looked a little bit weird. So I'm just going to choose this all and right click and go to soften smooth edges. I'm going to undo something real quick to show you that you may have something like that. And you want to clean that up a little bit. And the way to do that is with the eraser tool. If I click on that tool, you'll see in the bottom left it says Shift equals hide, Option equals soften smooth. So tools in SketchUp will often give you little hints down here in the bottom left. So pay attention to that because it tells you keyboard modifiers that may alter what that tool does. So in this case, I can hold down Shift or Option, and on Windows it'll be a little bit different. You'll see the keys there that show you which modifier keys correspond to that tool. But on the Mac here, Shift is hide and Option is soften smooth. And the difference between those, I'll show you here. If I don't click the key at all, of course I'm going to delete geometry. So that gets rid of the edges and the surfaces go away. So I'm going to undo that. If I hold down Shift, I can hide those edges. If I hold down Option, I can soften those edges. So the difference here is you can see that it treats the way the texture transitions between those surfaces. So here, when I've hidden the edges, it's not quite as smooth as I want, but over here where I did the soften smooth, that gradient really flows nicely and makes it look more curved. So again, that's the softened area, and these are the hidden edges. If I turn on hidden geometry, you can see those edges are still there, they're just either hidden or softened. And as you saw me just do, I can also select everything, then right-click, choose Soften Smooth Edges, and from here, I could perhaps soften an entire piece of geometry all at once. Let me turn off hidden geometry there. So here I can soften all of this at the same time. If you'd like to import a texture from your computer, perhaps an image file that you've got on your computer, it could be a JPEG or a PNG or various other image files, you can go to File, Import, and before I do this, I actually want to jump into the edit mode for this group because I want to apply this right to this surface. So I'm going to go to File, Import now that I'm inside that component, or this group in this case, and choose between one of these images here. So I've got that JPEG selected. If your image file appears grayed out or is not selectable, it's possible you don't have the right format selected. So if I change this to AutoCAD files, you can see that I can no longer select that image file. So make sure you've got the right format chosen. Then I can choose that JPEG, can double click or choose Import here. And initially I'm given the ability to scale this, and at this stage you don't have to worry about scale too much because as I place this, I can then go to that right click option again and choose Texture Position and then place that how I want it to go. And here I'm holding down the Shift key. Actually, it's a toggle. You can just tap the Shift key and you can get these fixed pins or use these colored pins. So the fixed pins let you click and drag almost like you're pinning up a poster. So this is keeping the location of the pin in relation to the image fixed and letting you pull that to a corner of the model. So you can kind of snap to geometry. Just make sure you're clicking right on that pin. So sometimes it skews it a little bit, so you may not want this option. So I'm going to undo that and just go back here and just click and simply drag to put it where I want. A nice little trick too is you can kind of hide images in your model. So in this case, let's say that I wanted to have a texture available to me but not really visible in this model. I can go behind this perhaps and sample the one that I've got back here and apply it to the other side. So it's still in the model, but it's kind of hidden unless I want it. Okay, so I like that one a little better. Okay, let's talk about shading for interior spaces in SketchUp. And this is really important because a lot of beginners don't consider this as they're working in SketchUp. And I want to open up the Shadows panel here and show you what this is all about. So let's minimize layers there. And if you don't see all these options, keep in mind that this little button here can expand certain boxes in SketchUp. So don't forget that you may be able to expand it if you don't see what you're looking for there. So this is important because in SketchUp, with interior spaces like this, there's actually a lot of control you have over the shade value. And a lot of beginners don't even deal with this. They kind of just go along with the whatever's preset there. And your model can look very dark, kind of like this, if you don't pay attention to that. So you do have control like this where you can really precisely affect those shading values. So the way that you do that is this Use Sun for Shading checkbox. What that means is I want to not cast shadows, but I do want to affect these sliders for shading. So if I go to View, I can turn on shadows here. I can also toggle them on or off with this button here. So this button does the same thing as the View Shadows, where I can turn on or off shadows. So if I turn off shadows but have this box checked, I'm telling SketchUp, I don't want you to cast shadows, but I do want to control the shade values here. You can see if I uncheck this box, then nothing changes as I move these sliders. So again, you're not casting shadows. Shadows are off, but you're using sun for shading. And you can very precisely dial these in. And that's important because, as many of you know, if you're in a room with 4 white walls, based on the lighting conditions in the inside, the 4 white walls could look very different like this, where one is more gray, one is more white. So as you're showing a client an interior space and you've picked out a precise wall color, remember that you really can change the way that wall color looks by using these sliders. So don't be stuck on a precise material that you choose, because it can really look very different as you move these around. And again, you can see that there's time, date, light, and dark, and even though we're not casting shadows, we're still able to use these to change the shade value. And if you get those where you like, you can actually save that information to a particular scene in SketchUp. And scenes in SketchUp are these tabs I have at the top. And when I make a change here, you can see that if I right-click and choose Update, and I'll also change this next scene here. We'll make a change to this one. Right-click, Update. As I toggle between these two, you'll notice that these sliders will change. So they remember that information. In Scenes, if you're new to that, I'll go to Windows Scenes here and show you that Scenes can save a variety of properties. So you can see here all these that are checked. That's the information that can be saved to certain scenes. So you can uncheck certain things if you'd like. The most used one is camera location. So you can kind of think of scenes as bookmarks for your 3D model, where you can, at the very least, use them to just kind of keep a certain spot in the model or vantage point saved. Okay, let's talk about how to navigate inside of a space that's somewhat small. When you're working inside interiors in SketchUp, you don't want to use some of the basic navigating tools, because you actually may want to keep your position fixed and perhaps just look around. The tool that lets you do that is this look around tool here. So you can see if I look down, I'm in the corner of this room, and I can just click and drag to look around from a fixed stationary point, kind of like you're turning your head. And the reason that this is nice is because if I use the orbit tool here, I can easily orbit outside of where I want to be and perhaps get inside of a wall. And if you're showing a client a model, it's nice to navigate efficiently and be able to swiftly show what you want without being kind of clunky and making it kind of tough to watch. So really get good at using these tools. And speaking of that, I do want to mention that you should be using a mouse with SketchUp. So for example, you've got these tools up here, the orbit tool is here, but you never saw me go to that tool because I'm using a mouse. So if I use it's a basic 3-button mouse with a middle scroll wheel button. If I depress that middle scroll wheel button, it activates that orbit tool. If you're on a touchpad, you certainly can still use SketchUp, but the difference is, I'll show you here as I start drawing a line. If I start this line and I want to orbit, and I don't have a mouse, I actually have to go click on the orbit tool, and it kicks me out of that line tool as I go to orbit now. However, if I undo that, draw that line again, and start using my mouse, you can see here I can draw while I'm actually still in that line tool, and I can orbit and pan using shift here. So I'm just using the mouse to shift and pan, and I'm still in that line tool. So that's really important because you want to master navigation in SketchUp first. If you're really new to SketchUp, perhaps download a model from the 3D warehouse and just practice navigating around it. That's really important. It helps you model more efficiently, and it's also, as I said, a nice way to show your model to somebody else when you're not fumbling around and navigating kind of rough. So let me get back into these tools here. Let's say we wanted to check out the vantage point from our buddy over here in the corner. So I can actually take a look at what the room looks like from his eye vantage point. And that's with this position camera tool. If I click and drag from his eye height here, I can release the mouse and look at a certain spot. So now you can see the eye height is a little over 2 feet. If I want to change that, I don't need to click down there. I can just type in the new eye height that I want. And then push enter, and that updates. And I'm already in this look around tool now, so I can just swivel my view. So you see that a lot in SketchUp. In the bottom right, as you're drawing, you may see this information change, and you never have to click down here. You can simply type the information, push enter, because SketchUp is always awaiting that input. The other tool I want to talk about here is this walk tool. If I click on this tool and then click and drag, you can see that as I get further away from where I first clicked, you can walk a little faster. So it's kind of a proximity sensor here from where you first click and drop down those crosshairs. So I'm just clicking and moving slowly away. And this is nice because it has collision detection, so I can run into walls and I don't actually go through things. Oh, kind of did there, but let me show you an example. If you're backing into a corner, let's say that I go over on this spot here, turn around, and I'll use the walk tool to back into this corner. So I'm just backing up, and because it senses that wall there, you can see it stops right there. If I look down, I'm now in the corner there. So those are nice tools to master for tight spaces like this. Let's say I want to look a little bit more over this direction, and a lot of times in interior spaces, you want to show a little bit more than perhaps the default field of view. So if I go to camera, field of view, I can click and drag and skew that field of view to show a little bit more if I need to, more or less. I can also type in a very precise field of view degrees there. So about right there, I can type in 45 or 35, or simply use the field of view tool here just to click and drag. Okay, let's talk about arrays in SketchUp and how to make copies of objects. So for this chair here, what I want to do is pre-select the object with the select tool. The default shortcut is spacebar, so it's kind of nice to use the spacebar to just get into the select tool here. Click on that tool or that object, go to the move tool and move the chair. You can see that in the bottom left again, it's letting me know that I've got some keyboard modifiers for this move tool. Option is copy, and then I've got a few others there. In this case, I do want to use option. Again, on the Windows, there'll be another key, it'll be the control key. And I want to hover out in the direction that I want to make a copy. In this case, I want to stay on that green axis, so I'm just hovering in the green axis direction. You can see in the bottom right, down here, it's now showing a length. So I could type in a precise length, or just click to drop that copy down. And then now if I type in, let's say 4x, enter, it'll make those copies. And I can change my mind if I don't do anything else. 2x, enter. So it's pretty easy to change your mind and keep getting that right until you like it. So that's a linear array. If you wanted to do more of a polar or radial array, I'll show you that with this tool here. Let's move this outside. So same process here. I want to pre-select the object, and I'm going to the rotate tool, and in this case I don't have any geometry to snap to, so I'm just going to kind of pick a point out here as my center point of rotation. So I'm going to click there the first time. The second click is on the object somewhere, and I'm starting that rotation, and then now again it says in the bottom left here, option is toggle copy. So I can tap that key, you don't have to hold it down, it's just a toggle. So I just tap it once to engage that copy. And here I can type in an angle, as you see in the bottom right there, it's awaiting an angle input. So I could type in 15 degrees, or just place it down and then type in the number of copies that I want. So I could type in 4x, enter, 12x, enter. And a lot of times you want to do a radial array where you place the last object first and then define the spacing in between. So to do that, again, you pre-select the object, go to the rotate tool, start rotating. I'm going to tap option to toggle that copy on, and in this case I want to go all the way over here and place the last one down. So I'm going to type in 180, enter, And now I'm going to type in, let's say 6, and then the / key, and then enter. So it's giving me equidistant copies there. It's infilling that space. And if I don't do anything else, I can again change my mind. 12 / enter. Let's try 8 / enter. And then these are facing the wrong way, so I could click on the object and go to the Move tool. And this tool, if I hover carefully over the bounding box, you can see that there is the ability to do a quick rotation here as well. If you wanted to do that with the Rotate tool, you could select the object, go to the Rotate tool, and with this tool, as you hover around, it changes its orientation based on where you're hovering. You can lock that by holding Shift. So if I hold down Shift here, you can see I can lock that green rotation plane. In this case, I want the blue ground plane, so I'll release that, hold Shift here, and then make my rotation. But I actually want to go to the bottom here to find the center point. So to do this, you can hover on the perimeter of a circle like this, just for a few seconds, and then hover to the inside, and that'll give you a center snap point. There we go. So you can rotate this from the center. So a couple different ways to do those rotations. Let's talk about the Follow Me tool now. So with this tool, we have a crown molding profile here. So what I want to do is pull this profile across a defined path. You can see here if I just double click into it and use the push-pull tool, I can push-pull that, but I can't really do much more than a perpendicular push-pull from that surface there. So with the Follow Me tool, I want to draw a path first, and you may have seen me toggle on the model like this. And what I'm doing here is actually, it's a shortcut for this View, Component Edit, Hide Rest of Model. And I made that a shortcut because I don't want to keep going into this nested menu here, so it's nice for me to just tap at one key to turn that on and off. So if you want to make shortcuts, go to the Preferences menu. On the Mac, it's right here, SketchUp Preferences. If you're on Windows, it'll be in the Window menu, Window Preferences. So SketchUp Preferences, and on the left side, you can go down to Shortcuts. And in this case, you can type in a tool, or in this example, I want to type in Hide Rest of Model. I can just type in Hide Rest, and you can see that it comes up here with this function, and I've got this already mapped to the H key. So I'll just close that. If you wanted to change that, you could just type in the new key there, but I want to keep that at H. If I just tap at the H key, you can see that it pretty easily turns that on or off, and I use that a lot. It's nice to be able to access the geometry in your model sometimes that's outside of a group or component, or perhaps turn it off to get a better look at what you're doing there. In this case, I do want that turned on because I want to trace the geometry out here, but have the lines appear inside this group. So I'm going to take the Line tool and just trace on the geometry out there, and I'm trying to figure out or draw the path here that I want this profile to follow. So I'll toggle that off again. You can see that line is actually inside this group, but I used SketchUp's inferencing to draw it with the model turned on outside of this group. So with the Follow Me tool, it's pretty easy. I can just select the path. So in this case, I'll do a triple click on the line to get all of these lines connected, and simply go to the Follow Me tool. And you can see that it takes that profile and extrudes it along that path. So it's creating a lot of geometry for you, especially in those intersection points. So I want to talk about an extension now that is pretty cool, and it does a similar function that the Follow Me tool does. It's called Profile Builder. So the extension warehouse, as I briefly showed before, is right here. You can also go to Window, Extension Warehouse, and the Extension Warehouse is a place where you can install add-ons or extensions for SketchUp that extend the functionality of SketchUp. So there's a lot of great tools here. A lot of them are free. So if you're new to SketchUp, really explore the extensions we have here. There's a lot of them that are free, so there's a pretty easy to just grab those and see what they can do. I'll show 2 here, but there's so many to look at. You can search for the top developers. They're not showing up here, but there'll be categories here that you can click on and inspect and see what we have in different categories. I'll just type in Profile Builder. And you can see here, got a few different results. I actually want to choose Profile Builder 2. This is the one I'm going to show here. And this one does cost money, but I want to show some of the power of extensions. So here, when you go to the page for an extension, you'll see a little video that shows what it can do, perhaps information about it, so you can see a lot about it before you decide to download it or purchase it. I'm going to close this for now. And I've already got this installed, so if I go to extensions, you can see Profile Builder 2 is there. There's a lot going on with this extension, so I'm just going to show the basic functionality of it. Let's get rid of these stools out here. So with this tool, again, it does a similar function that the Follow Me tool does, but the power of this one is that you can actually combine profiles together. So for example, if you had a wall section and you combined all the different elements of that wall, perhaps the drywall, the insulation, the footing, the exterior cladding, you could combine all those profiles together and perhaps trace a floor plan. So I'm just going to show this with, let's just grab one of these from the library here. And I can click around and just drag that profile around. So you can see if I had a more complex wall here, I could very easily just trace a floor plan and already have those walls already created. So in the example of the crown molding, I'll show you how that works here. Let's get rid of this one. And if I choose a crown molding here, I can make anything a profile to be used with this extension, so I don't have to use what's in this library here. I could draw any profile and tell the extension that I want that to be my profile, so you could draw your own, of course. I'm going to just choose this one, and as I click around on the path, you can see it does that for me. So it's a pretty great tool, lots of uses, and it's pretty complex, does a lot of great things. We'll have a blog post about this, I think, later this month, so look for that if you want to find out more about that extension. I also want to show the soap bubble extension. It's kind of a fun one, not necessarily directly applicable to interior design, but it's kind of fun to show what it can do. So I'll just draw basic shape here. If you're new to SketchUp, you can inference other geometry. So here I can type in the height of that or inference the height of the wall here to make that the right height. I'm just doing this to create a complex loop of edges here. It's pretty easy sometimes to get off axis, so if I'm trying to draw this on this surface here, it's pretty easy to sometimes come out to this side and accidentally draw that perhaps not on the surface. So most of the time, the way to fix that is just to adjust your viewpoint. So if I just orbit a little bit differently, it changes kind of how SketchUp is inferencing. And you can also see if I hover, it'll say on face. But usually just changing the way that your vantage point is and just orbit a little bit differently sometimes makes that easier. So again, I'm just drawing this to help me create this more complex loop of edges. And what I'm trying to do here is put a surface on these edges. So I'll move this out to this side a little bit. So I want to drape a surface on this loop of edges. Let's go to that extension. I've already got that installed. This one's in the tool palettes here. Soap bubble. So I want to select everything, click on this first button, and you can see in the bottom right it's awaiting a division input. So I could change that to 20, push enter, get a more dense grid there, push enter again. And this one's fun because you can watch it work. So it's calculating how to drape that surface based on those bounding edges. I can also change the pressure of that as well. If I click on that, go to this button here, you can see it now, it says pressure. I could type in 50, perhaps 100. Could even do a negative number to go the other direction. So that's just a pretty fun extension to show, just to help you understand what extensions can do. Let's get rid of that. And let's talk about styles now. For interior design, styles are pretty useful. So styles basically apply a stylized look to your model with watermarks and certain edge styles. So this one here I've already got saved to this particular scene. I'm going to open up the styles browser here. And again, this one has a similar button to help you expand part of that panel. So styles, there's a lot going on with styles. I won't cover everything here, but just a brief overview. If I go into assorted styles here, I can change using some of these preset options here. So I can quickly click on one of these new styles and see how it looks in this current scene. It's important to note that you don't actually want to model with a complex style on, because SketchUp will try to re-render the scene as you orbit and model. So a lot of these styles are really just meant for a static view that you maybe tie or save to a scene. If you do want to think about which styles to use as you're modeling, if you see this little green icon here, I'll go to the default styles here. If it has a green icon like this, that means that it's a fast style and it's good for modeling. So it'll be a little bit snappier if it's got that green icon. You can also mix and match attributes of different styles to create your own custom style. So let's say in this one here, I wanted to adjust it a little bit based on attributes that I borrow from various different styles. So I can go to the Edit tab to change various different things about the style, or go to the Mix tab here, and the Mix tab allows me to drag these attributes down here into the category settings right there. So if I wanted to change the edge style for this, I could go into, let's say, sketchy edges, and choose one of these and drag that into the appropriate category. Let's go to assorted styles, and let's use the watermark from this one. Drag that there. And I'll use the face styles from this one. And as I'm making those changes, it's important to note that you actually need to update this if you want to save it. So if I like this style, I need to click here to update that and save it as a new custom style. So there we go. I click on that, you'll see those arrows disappear. And if I right click now, I can update the scene, and this scene will be saved with this particular style. Again, there's a lot more to styles, so you can, at the end of this video, I'll talk about some resources to find more information. But styles are pretty useful, and again, for interior design, they're especially useful because they may help show your model in a way that doesn't look as finished. Perhaps it's more of a conceptual design. You don't want the client to think that it's done. Styles are a really great way to make it look sketchy and somewhat unfinished. On the other side of that spectrum, you can do rendering in SketchUp. And I want to talk about one extension that's called Visualizer. And I want to show this one because it's the most simple rendering option in SketchUp, and it's free. So if you're new to rendering, I recommend this one. I'll jump into the warehouse here, the extension warehouse, do a search for that. So Visualizer for SketchUp. I've already got this one installed, but I just wanted to show you where this was. And again, it's free, and it's really easy to use. So you can go here and watch a quick video. I'm going to close this now. So I've got a scene saved here with shadows turned on that I want to use for my Visualizer render. So I'm going to go to Extensions, Visualizer, and start it up. And it's pretty quick. As you open it, it already starts to render the current scene. So you'll see it start to render here. And if I change my view as it's rendering, it will update and restart the render. So I could zoom in a little bit there, and you can see it's updating and restarting. And you notice I didn't do any kind of setup before I started the render here. And if you've used renders before, a lot of times you do need to do a little bit of setup at the start to define reflectivity of materials and various other things before you render. So it just kind of depends on your needs. Sometimes you may need a more control over your scene, so you may want to choose a different renderer in SketchUp. And there's a lot of different options, so I encourage you to go to our extension warehouse and check out those options. But I do want to show this one because it is free and easy to use, so it's a really great way to get introduced to rendering in SketchUp. And I've already got this scene already done, so I'll cruise over to that. And I think this one took, let me close the visualizer here. And so this one took maybe about 20 or 30 minutes. You can see it's not quite finished here. But pretty easily you can get an output that's more of a realistic render. You can see here in the reflection of the windows is pretty good without me having to do any kind of setup. So I'll close that down. And the next scene here, I want to talk about the use of sections for animation. So perhaps not something you're going to use a lot in interior design, but just thought it was kind of a fun example to show. As I cruise through these scenes, you can see that you can animate certain things, so perhaps a progression of items appearing may be useful to you. And I can tie that to different scenes here, so I can animate it's basically a transition from a section cut in a static viewpoint, or I could change my view as well as show that animation happening. So if I go to View, Section Planes, you can see what's happening here. I've actually placed 2 section planes inside this window group, and if you right click and choose Active Cut, you can save which cut is active to certain scenes. And there's actually a plugin that does this, almost automates this process, called Animate Sections, so you should check that one out too. It's free as well. So it's a pretty fun way to show a little bit of animation in SketchUp. And if you do want to go deeper into animation in SketchUp, I'll show you how to do that. You can right click and play animation. This just toggles through the scenes that you have and animates those for you. So right now I'm not clicking between these scenes here, I'm just letting it play the animation. I can change the scene transition time as well. If I go to Window, Model Info, Animation, I can up the transition time so it may be a slower transition between scenes, or I could actually turn that off if I just wanted to jump between scenes. If you go to File, Export, you can export animation as well. So here you can see the format options we have. And if you choose one and go to this option button, you can actually control a little bit more about that and about that way that's exported. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about layout. So there's not a whole lot of time left, but I do want to briefly mention this. Layout is a secondary application that comes with SketchUp Pro. So if you've not heard of it, it is what you want to use to showcase your SketchUp model in some form, whether that be via presentation or in maybe 2D documentation. So what I can do here is set up a few scenes in SketchUp that I know I might need in layout. So for example, I've got plan here and elevation. And you can see that my perspective is turned off in these scenes. So for the plan view, if I go to camera, perspective, you can toggle that on or off. So in this case, I wanted this scene to just have the perspective turned off for my straight down plan view. And there's elevation. If you have different elevations, of course, you can change with these buttons up here. You can quickly snap to those views. This is not a very complex model, so there's not a lot of interesting things going on there. But if I had an off angle elevation, you can also right click on a surface and choose Align View, and that aligns you to the perpendicular view of that surface. But I want to show you how to go into layout from SketchUp here. So if you go to File, Send to Layout. Oops, got to save the model first. A quick note about saving in SketchUp. You might have seen that little wheel appear a few times as I was modeling, and that's because I had autosave set to a certain time period. If you go to Model Info, actually it's in Preferences, General. So I have it set for every 20 minutes. It's probably better to do that every 5 minutes, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes. So SketchUp will autosave and create a backup if you tell it to. So it's good to pay attention to this because in SketchUp it's nice to have autosaves happening in the background. Okay, I've saved my model, and now I'm going to File, Send to Layout. And here you can see that I'm in Layout now, no longer in SketchUp, and initially I have the choice to choose between maybe a default template. I can also create my own. In this case, I'll just choose ArcD Landscape with this default template here. You can see you've got some choices there. I'm going to choose that template. And the first thing that I see is a viewport being placed onto my page. So what this is a viewport into my SketchUp model. Again, I'm no longer in SketchUp. It's back here. I'm in Layout now. And this viewport is pretty nice because it's a portal into the SketchUp model. So I can access various things from this viewport. I can right-click and go between different scenes that I've already got set up here. So I could go to my plan scene, and you'll see it's rendering automatically. It's re-rendering that scene. I can change the scale here by right-clicking, going to Scale, choosing a new scale, and I can adjust that viewport after it renders. Let's go to a smaller one. And then let's make that viewport a little bit smaller, and then I can copy this viewport as well. Let's move this over to the side and make a copy. And now I can right-click and choose the elevation scene that I already have made. If you decide that you want to make new scenes after you've already started a layout document, that's no problem. You can go into SketchUp, make a change, and then in Layout you need to update that model reference. So if I made a change, maybe added some new elevation scenes, I could right-click and update model reference. And that syncs up the SketchUp model with your layout document. So here I can, of course, change the scale here to something different. And another cool thing you can do, I can draw a circle, or any shape really, to create a clipping mask. So I could combine this circle with the viewport, right-click, choose Create Clipping Mask. So a pretty easy way to do a quick detail. And so any shape can be a clipping mask. As far as the cover page goes, let's copy this viewport. I'm going to copy this over to the cover page and then paste that there. And let's say I wanted to access one of my styles here. I can choose the style scene. So for the cover page, if I wanted a particular style view, I could do that pretty easily. You can see here SketchUp is auto rendering this. If I unchecked that auto button there, I would then need to render it manually and click on that button each time I made a change. If you've got a view like this that's a stylized view, you actually want to use the raster choice here. There's vector, raster, and hybrid. For any kind of line work, like over on this page, I want to use, actually in this case I want to use hybrid. And hybrid will show the rasterized version of the textures or colors along with the vectorized line work. If you just have a elevation without showing the materials or colors, you do want to choose vector, and vector will give you would make those lines just all vector. But back on the cover page, I wanted to keep that raster because it was a stylized view in SketchUp, so I don't need any vector lines there. I just wanted that stylized raster view. Let's go back here. Let's say that I wanted to use my rendered image in place of this one, so I can delete that viewport, and I can also insert a static image file like this visualizer one. So I can bring this PNG into this cover page if I preferred to use the rendered view instead of that stylized SketchUp view. So there's a lot going on with layout, and we have other videos and documentation about how to use layout. This is a super basic view of layout. Don't forget that you've got things like text and labels and dimensioning that you can do in layout. So you shouldn't be doing dimensioning in SketchUp. You should do all of this in layout. But I'm out of time here, so I don't want to go too deep into this. There are other videos that are better for that. And I will briefly show you some of the resources that I mentioned before. So our home page, on SketchUp.com. You can go down to the bottom here and you have access to things like the Knowledge Center, our forum, and our blog. So our Knowledge Center is a really nice place to type in your search for certain tools in SketchUp or certain techniques. We have a lot of great articles in our Knowledge Center here. The forum is a really great place to ask a question or do a search for your question and see if someone else has asked it. We have a lot of people in here that are really excited to help you out and answer your questions, so I really encourage you to try our forum if you have any kind of questions or curiosity about our community. Our YouTube channel is probably the first place you should go if you're looking for any kind of tutorials or quick videos. This one's a little bit longer, but we do have a lot of short videos that are really nice to understand certain tools and techniques in SketchUp. I want to point you to our playlist option here. So playlists, the skill builder one is really good. We're just starting this one up. So there's 8 videos now. You should see more as time goes on. This is a really great curated collection of videos that will just be kind of a few minutes showing you a tool or a technique in SketchUp. So check that out. And again, our YouTube channel our SketchUp channel is a special channel on YouTube. So if you do a search for SketchUp YouTube channel, you'll see it's called SketchUp Video. Our blog is also a really good place to read about case studies, tips and tricks, lots of good things on our blog. And again, here's the 3D Warehouse and Extension Warehouse outside of SketchUp that you can search and browse there. But again, these are really better accessed from within SketchUp. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.